Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Catalyst Story session, Focusing the Room. I'm your host and Director of Mentoring and Partnerships, Jennifer Platsky, and today our guest is KP Anderson. He is an Emmy award-winning showrunner, writer, and comedian. Most notably, he was the head writer and executive producer of The Soup on E! He has also worked on The Joel McHale Show and When Nature Calls with Helen Mirren. Welcome, KP. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Hey,
Really
Jennifer, good to
appreciate
see
you
you.
taking the time. Yeah. So let's just dive right in. I would love to just start off, since there, maybe a little bit of mystery that surrounds this question. What is the role of the showrunner, and what are those responsibilities?
Oh, wow. Half hour, huh? Yeah. So the showrunner, basically the best way to put it is the showrunner is sort of like the hub of the wheel of a production. Is you're like the human vessel who all issues, problems, creative momentum, creative direction, budgetary issues, and everything sort of flows through that person, and the showrunner is the person who sort of brings that in and puts it back out with with advice from and work from everybody on the staff to create a plan to congeal it all together and move forward to make a production happen. And you're also sort of like the primary communicator between the network, the studio, the buyer, the streamer, whoever it is, in terms of all things that are going on with the show, marketing, promotion, execution, taking in the notes, getting them to the creative staff, moving them, moving them through the process, and keeping the train running on time. Is the easiest definition I can give of that.
Yes, it sounds easy.
Another way of putting it is chief shit taker in charge of absolutely nothing. That's another way. It's a great
Perfect.
title. It's a killer title. It gets people with big egos to go, yeah, I'll do that, and then you go, oh no, this is a
Oh,
lot.
wait.
Oh, everybody's yelling at me. Huh.
Oh God. Oh God. I take it back. I take it all back.
Yeah.
Um, so in that realm, then you're collaborating with talent, writers, directors, execs, all of the people that you just mentioned. For someone that is looking to do that, what is the skill set that helps with that?
Man, it is a broad set of skills. It is not a position that you get to on your first job, for sure. And people come at it from all different places in the business. Directors often become showrunners, writers often become showrunners, but also line producers, the people who handle and oversee the money on the show. They have a lot of contact with the studio, a lot more contact with the business machination of the studio, as well as the creative execs. And a lot of times they start getting attention as like, well, wow, they can really like function in all capacities. So coming up through production also, like physical production, also can lead to that position if you show that, if you show that skill set. I think that, the primary one and the biggest one that I don't know anybody who's done it who successfully who isn't a good communicator,
Mm.
and doesn't have a good sense of being able to sort of like take a big, be an umbrella with a whole lot of rain coming down, and understanding how and when to filter which pieces to move things forward at the right time, and which things are affecting each other and all that stuff. So it's a lot of multitasking. It's a lot of mental multitasking
Mhm.
that you have to get very good at as well. And then, the other thing is there's so many qualities that make you good at it, but like a thirst for knowledge of how the entirety of a production works. Like you can't just be good at writing and become a showrunner.
Right.
And then extrapolate that out to any position on a production, or agents and managers who become showrunners. You can't. You have to be willing to, step forward and have a lot of curiosity about how all the things you don't know work. And you've got to, and it's a whole bunch of different languages once you start talking about, the technical parts of it. I'm not a director, but I had to learn how to talk to directors, and same with, directors of photography and lighting people, and hair and makeup and wardrobe folks. So that everybody, editors, everybody's coming at it with a different skill set, and inside of those skill sets, they all sort of have their own, breakdown glossary of how they look at or how they communicate with each other, and you've got to speak all of those languages, including network, studio, executive, marketing people speak. So it's really sort of like a true desire to know how it all comes together,
Mhm.
and then some ability to absorb it and retain it. And then comes back to communication, is the ability to, move around from place to place. So being a people person doesn't help either, or doesn't hurt either. Yeah,
I got you.
doesn't
So,
help.
yes, definitely. It's just like you have to have that global view of everything that's going on, every single aspect, every person, every job.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
have that weird hair. You ever have that weird hair?
it looks
Yeah.
great. It looks great.
All right, we're just gonna deal with that today.
Listen,
Yeah,
and these cameras are backwards, so it's
yeah,
like you're touching over here, and you're like, wait, that's not the
exactly,
same.
exactly. But this knowledge is invaluable. Stop staring at my hair. Look me here.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Well, you have a unique niche in the industry as an unscripted showrunner with a comedy background.
yeah.
So, can you tell us about being a quote unquote fixer and how that can impact the dynamic of the show?
Sure. A lot of what I do, a couple of shows that I've been brought on to show run, I've been brought on to late in the game where, it had already been shot, and the funny wasn't permeating out
Mm,
on stuff. So I get a lot, and I do a lot as a consultant. I'm in the middle of 3 projects right now as a consultant that are kind of down the same line as, like, we made this and we like where we're at story wise. We like the way it's shot. We like the way it looks. The problem is that the comedy that we were hoping to get isn't resonating for one reason or another. Can you come in and work with the current showrunner? Sometimes it's, can you replace the current showrunner? More often than not, it's, can you work with the current showrunner and their team and help them get to that point. So it's a writing job first and foremost, and then again, it's a lot of politics. It's a lot of, a lot of times the person who you're stepping in to work with doesn't think it's not funny.
mhm.
uh, and
Oh,
those are hard words to hear, and I've been in that position, on the other side, not necessarily on the not funny, but when nature calls, the Helen Mirren Show. We were moving at warp speed to get this thing made because it was ordered on very short notice, and ABC had a sort of design in mind for the show
mm,
that they felt like my team and I were getting close to, but we weren't quite striking it there. And because they have taste and they have particular tastes, and they had a showrunner, Charles Walker, who's a great guy who does Holy Moly and a whole bunch of other stuff for ABC. They asked Charles to step in, and luckily we were friends and we've known each other off and on in other things. But they asked Charles to come in and help me find that, like, figure out what those 1, 2, 3 things we needed to do inside the cuts to make that tone that helped us get to what they were seeking. And it was my first time being on the receiving end of that, and thank God it was a friend. Um, but it is, it can be really jarring if you don't come at it from a standpoint of, like, hey, they've asked me to set myself up inside of these parameters. So I'm not going to make staffing recommendations. I'm not going to ask you to recut the whole thing. I'm going to try to find what they're looking for
mhm.
inside of what you've delivered and help you amplify that. And outside of just being courteous, it's also financially a really good idea, because if you step in with this, like, well, apparently you fucked it all up and now I got to tear it apart and redo it, that's not gonna get the job done in a timely or undramatic manner. And it's really not the case, by the way. It's also these are talented people
Right.
that it's just a buyer is looking for something tonally that they haven't seen.
Mhm.
Uh, and so the comedy background, I never get called to do it on, nobody asked me to do it on Bad Vegan. Like, nobody goes nobody goes, hey, we've got this searing drama and we need more searing drama. Get the idiot from the soup. Let's see what he's got.
Right?
Like, I don't get that one. But like, that's the job, is really, like, to try to go, okay, well, all the money's been spent, all the resources have been committed. So what can we do to get this where it needs to be? And how do I work with the people who are hired to do it in the first place?
Gotcha. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes
Does
sense.
that answer the question? I think it does.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely
Yeah.
it does.
Thank you.
Um, so maybe sort of in that same vein, like what does it mean to find like your core competency, and how can the showrunner focus the energy of the room?
Okay. Good question. It's in two parts. Your core competency. Okay, so comedy is my core competency. I started out as a stand-up comic. I still perform stand-up comedy. And when I started in Minneapolis in 1990, it was, that bright light over your head, hear your calling moment,
Mhm.
where it was finally this C student in college, double majoring in alcoholism and academic probation, finally had like this, oh my God, there's something I care about. I want to
Yeah.
be good at this.
Yeah.
And so I was in the 90s in Minneapolis. It was an amazing comedy scene because we had Louis Anderson, we had a whole bunch of great people coming
Yeah.
through. And so I got to work with great headliners from, it was the heyday of stand-up comedy, and I got Jerry Seinfeld and Bill Maher and Rita Rudner and
Wow.
Ellen DeGeneres and Bill Hicks, who nobody remembers but was brilliant, and all these great comics coming through that I got to, perform with, learn from, absorb, and I immersed myself in it. And one thing that kept coming back from all the comics that I worked with was, you're really, you're a good comic, and if you keep going, you'll be great. But you're a great writing talent already. Like, you're doing something that the others aren't. You're unfolding things, and you're extrapolating bits out, and you're trying to tell stories and three acts and a joke and all of that stuff. And maybe that's something that you should consider as a direction to go. And so then I began to absorb and study comedy writing, and that was my sort of entree in, was writing on staffs for Politically Incorrect with Bill Maher on ABC, and Keenan Ivory Wayans show, and the show called More Sports on ESPN with Jay Moore was my first head writer job. And Last Comic Standing. I did a whole bunch of that type of stuff before the Soup came along, and I got my first show running gig. But it was that comedy, my knowledge of comedy, the fact that I could go back to comedy as the first look at a solution to any problem with what the finished content was.
Mm.
If it's not working here, there, some other place, can we use comedy to bridge that gap before we try other more dramatic stuff?
Mhm.
And so comedy, I always have this ability. My core competency as a showrunner, it's why I do comedy shows and comedy variety more than anything, is because that's where I come at everything from, is like, you hired me, so you must want it funny. So let's start there. And
Mhm.
then and usually, the big problems on a production always sort of stem from, if you're the showrunner and you're brought in for one thing or the other, if the show's not executing the way that it's supposed to, your core competency is usually tied directly to that finished product. So a director who becomes a showrunner, say, is oftentimes, they're brought in because they're so great at interpreting a script and creating a big vision, and creating this thing that, like, sight, sound, everything comes together in this fantastic thing. And that's why the executives, when they start breaking down a script and deciding who's going to run a show, if they buy it without a showrunner attached, is because you get hired because they know you to be good in the space that they think is most crucial to what's going to make this work. Um,
Mhm.
and so you get into like, that core competency becomes your first step in all problem solving, because if the show sucks, it's usually going to suck on the level of the thing you do best not working. If that makes sense.
Yep, it absolutely does.
Yeah. So as in terms of advice for people, it's really about, like, if you find yourself really good at something, if you're a great editor and you just it just sings, you just feel yourself, you know it really, really well, and you want to absorb those other parts of production, and you want to take in all that other stuff, and eventually you want to work into this lane, then just never lose sight of that. That's going to be your first place to go all of the time, to be able to speak to the show from that viewpoint. Like, and editors make really good showrunners, because when they get there, because they're always thinking about what it's going to look like put together,
Mhm.
and they're always working backwards from that pivotal point where all of the options you have in front of you for what this is going to be have been made. So now, now we've got to put the pieces together based on what we've got, and the money's been spent, and no one wants to go back into reshoots. And the most you can do is maybe add some voiceover or something to it, or some graphics, whatever it's going to be. But that's your thing, is know that. And as you start talking about budgeting the show, and you start talking about scheduling the show, and you start talking about all of the things that are going to be a piece of that show, go back to your inner editor and think about that final step before you press send, and before it becomes, for the American public to tweet nasty things about. Like, think about how you move backwards from there.
Right.
I always think backwards from, how's it going to be funny?
Right.
Yeah. What was the second part of the question?
What was the second part? Oh, how do you focus the energy of the room based on, you kind of
Yeah.
touched on that, but yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, I think it's a little asked and answered is kind of the same thing. Like, again, when I hire a staff, if the writers are the easy one, right? Is they're there to make it funny, and they're there to lend that context. Editors as well, directors, everybody's serving that beast on my shows, because funny is the end goal. But it also becomes important when you're talking to like line producers and physical producers, is a lot of times, especially when you're talking about comedy, comedy is a sort of like I don't want to like overblow it, but it's sort of I don't mean to say you either have it or you don't, but for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
you that predisposition to timing, and to tone, and to voice, and to all of those things that, all those little nuggets that make a joke great, or make a scene great, or anything else. Those are sort of like first felt and then crafted,
Mm-hmm.
uh, over and honed, I should say, over time. And so a lot of people who work in production, who are really just amazing boots on the ground, get it set up, do this, do that. Not everybody, but it's not their first job on everything that they do. And so you have to learn to speak to them, to tell them why you need it to be, how many stupid conversations I've had with my line producer going, no, it can't be a green Nerf ball, asshole. It's got to be a pink one, because no one will get the fucking joke if it's not, Luckily, my line producer and I are really good friends. But like that
Yeah.
moment of like, I don't expect you to understand why the thing that the prop guy bought isn't going to work for us, because it's exactly what I said, and I didn't specify the color, but go get me another one.
Just go with it. Just go with it.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm never like that, but it's
Noted.
calmer about that. But yeah, that's the inner monologue going.
Right. Exactly. This is what I'm saying. This is how it sounds.
Yeah.
So what is the difference between knowing how to work with talent, like kind of in what you're talking about, knowing how to work with talent and knowing how to let talent work? Like, how do you find that sort of balance?
Boy, that's an interesting question. It's kind of all one and the same,
Hmm.
especially in comedy, and especially in this very specific lane where I've, whether it's Norm Macdonald or Joel McHale, or even Helen Mirren doing the voiceovers on When Nature Calls, or Bill, or anybody that I've worked with. It's a lot of the time when you're in this space, and especially when you're doing like a talky type of show, or a talk show even, you're working with talent who really know their own voice. Like, they wouldn't be in this position if they weren't very, very evolved as performers.
Sure.
And so, like, since Joel is the one who I've done the most work with, and we did 12 years on the Soup, and then we did the other show, and we've done a whole bunch of other crap together. Um, um, he's a very good example of, this is a guy. His skill set when we met up on the Soup was not, like, I was there to help him, among other things. I was there to help him basically learn how to read a teleprompter for comedic effect.
Hmm.
And, sort of like the audience, I get it that there's a live audience on this side of the camera and this side of the camera, but the audience that matters is through the camera, and that's not going to react to you the way they are. But you've got to wait after you tell the joke, even if they're laughing at you. You got to maintain eye contact into that camera, so whoever's sitting on the couch watching it will laugh and
Right.
then you can look over at them and give them something, but don't give them anything until you've given, sorry, someone just called in. Don't give them anything at all until you've given them, there we are. Hi, sorry. I was like switching screens. Um, yeah. So it was working with Joel in that capacity on the physically, how do I do this side?
Mhm.
But already when Joel and I met, he was an infuriatingly confident performer and knows exactly who he is, and so it was at that point in time, you're trying to like you're trying to give them stuff to say and do inside the show that they can immediately pull into themselves and turn it into their own and own it and inhabit it, even though it's coming from a staff of writers and you and collected ideas from producers and all the other stuff. And so the phrase that I always use is talent speaks,
Mm.
is that, there's is that it's always, I'm not there, and when I apply for jobs or when I'm interviewed for jobs as a showrunner, I'm usually interviewing with the talent who's going to be on the show, who's going to be the star as well. And it's that same thing as I always say, I'm never going to put words in your mouth that you don't want to say. If we give you a script and you hand it back to me with lines stricken through jokes, I'm not going to debate you on why I think you should tell this joke,
Mhm.
because nothing is less funny than explaining a joke. By the way, like it's just it's arduous, and sometimes they want to be polite and go, no, maybe I just don't get it. Just tell me. And I go, no, I'll just write another joke.
I forget it.
But it's because that's, they're not going to be able to deliver a joke. This doesn't really apply in the scripted world when you're working with actors, and the story needs to hold, and obviously there's a lot of input on a lot of sets from a lot of talent, but there's more, there's more tactile reasons why you need to sometimes push back a little bit in that position and say, hey, look, the story breaks out this way, and I realize you're thinking of your character in this regard, but if I move that the way you're suggesting, it's going to undo all of this. That's never going to happen on a show hosted or driven by an iconoclastic performer who's doing their thing their way, or
Right.
it's not often going to happen. So so it's and when it does have to, because I work with them in a way that that allows them the latitude to say, I don't want to say it, and I go, okay, well, let's figure out something else.
Yeah.
More often than not, on those few times where it does come down to like, hey, I don't think you're seeing the whole picture here, they're more likely to want to hash that out, because I haven't been down their throat debating every joke that on a 78 joke script, that they that going, no, why do you hate that one? Why do you hate that one? It was great, I wrote it. It
Yeah.
doesn't. The job isn't to write one joke and walk away. The job is to make the show great.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
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 Um, so earlier we were talking about being a fixer and sort of coming in to help something that's maybe gone a little off course or isn't quite fitting. What what would be the reason that a show's energy would go off the rails? Like, you're the showrunner and you're already working, and it's sort of like going in a direction you didn't expect. Is there a way to predict that or navigate that? What would that look like?
But sometimes it's because you've been doing it for 12 years and Community is going really well on NBC and everybody's just fucking tired of each other.
Yeah.
But others,
That makes sense.
he'd say the same thing.
Mhm.
But no, I think that there's a lot of things that can happen. There's especially when you're doing long running stuff. It's a submarine.
Yeah.
The Soup, we did 50 weeks a year for 12 years. And sometimes when Joel and I maintained a really good relationship throughout all of that, and we were sort of attached at the hip. But speaking of Community, when Joel started getting other things, and I started getting other shows to produce underneath my larger umbrella that I'd built over there, yeah, I think it actually helped us. Maybe not so much creatively, because neither of us were as present. So we had to like really, in the time we got together, we had to really get into it with each other, and not get into it fight wise, but like not waste time.
Mhm.
Uh, but it did allow us to break a little bit and go, okay, not everything is this show at a time when you've been doing it for a long time. But I think also that affects a staff who's been together for a long time, are wondering when mom and dad are getting home, and at the same time they're going, hey, we got this without you, and then you two idiots show up and everything changes. And you have to maintain that, and you have to, morale is a huge reason why a show, like, and it doesn't have to be the morale of stars. Obviously we've all read stories about when, in success, people, start seeing other different bigger things, and just want to get on creatively, because we're all creative animals.
Right.
And that can be a thing. It can be that, the people who are buying the show change out. There's a lot of changeover at the executive level. It has been for a long time in Hollywood. So we delivered the soup to 4 different administrations, and their initiatives changed. By the time we ended, we were the only half-hour TV show on E. Chelsea Handler quit, Joan Rivers died, and it was us and Sex and the City reruns. And so it was, they were very into reality, and the people who came in and replaced Ted Harbert, who bought the show and loved the show, they didn't hate it, but they didn't understand us, and we weren't part of their built resume.
Mhm.
Uh, so a lot of the times it's that, as you're getting. And also, by the way, we were doing reality TV. I'm doing a lot about the soup, but I think it covers a lot of the question.
Yeah.
We were covering reality TV, and Daniel Tosh was covering viral moments, and viral moments had sort of overtaken reality TV as the thing everybody passed around and shared and talked about. That was the water cooler now,
Yeah.
and so a lot of stuff. I am so sorry. I think I have to go.
That's okay.
Uh,
That was my final question,
oh,
and
great,
yes, that worked
excellent.
out perfectly time-wise. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here and talking with us about this. And we will catch up with you later. And everyone can stay up to date with what KP is working on Instagram. Follow him at IKP Anderson on Instagram.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, I am doing some consulting, people career building consulting for people who want to get into this. So if you hit me up on my messages there and want to talk about that, I'm happy to hear from you.
Oh, that's excellent. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. This was a blast.
Brought to you by the Catalyst Story Institute.